Hello everybody and welcome to my video. My name is Dr. Jennifer Schluer and today I'd like to talk about academic writing and the research process. Here's a brief overview of the contents that we are going to tackle. First, I'd like to do a little warm-up with you regarding your background knowledge. Then we're going to talk about the phases of the research process and of the academic writing process. In that respect, I'd like to put my focus on the structure of academic texts, which already reflects many important characteristics and requirements of academic texts and presentations. And finally, I'd like to conclude with some practical advice. So let's start with the warm-up. My question is, what comes to your mind when you think about academic writing and research? What are your first ideas upon hearing these terms, your feelings and spontaneous ideas, and maybe you already have gained some content knowledge about it? You can briefly think about it for a while for yourself and note down your thoughts. It would be a good idea to pause the video so that you'll have enough time to think about the question and about your own prior experience. I have also collected some ideas about research and academic work. Research, first of all, means striving for knowledge and new insights. The procedure for achieving this should be as objective as possible. However, this kind of objectivity is often hard to attain, since every research endeavor is driven by the motivations and research interests of the scholars. Moreover, their own prior knowledge and experience influences the methods they choose. Thus, research is always subjective to a certain extent. Nevertheless, one should try to strive for objectivity, for example by reflecting on one's procedure and aims and by giving reasons for the steps taken. The procedure should thus be systematic. The precision should not only apply in methodological terms, but also linguistically regarding the academic language and style and the correct terminology, for example. The precise description will help to make your research transparent to others and reproducible by other researchers in other contexts. Even if you have paid attention to everything and reflected on all single steps, you should nevertheless be able to accept criticism in a constructive manner. Likewise, your ability to give constructive feedback to others is crucial. All in all, you should of course obey academic conventions and ethical guidelines when doing your research, for example regarding the anonymization of your data and the correct citation of your sources. These are some of the essential criteria, but there is also a bit freedom in the implementation or realization, so to express and create your own academic identity and academic writing identity. But what are the essential steps or phases of the research process? Do you have any idea? Again, you may first pause the video for a while in order to think about this question. Here you can see an illustration of the research process. First, you clarify the aim or topic of your research. Then you review the previous literature. Afterwards, you come up with your research design before you start collecting and analyzing your data. Next, you discuss your results in light of the previous literature and finally present your research as an academic paper or presentation, for instance. As the arrows indicate, your research aim or central research question influences all subsequent phases. Therefore, it is highly important to be clear about the topic right from the start of the research process. Its scope should be manageable within the page limit that is requested from you. Moreover, the arrows show that the single phases of the research process cannot be clearly separated from each other. One influences the other, and writing is usually part of it at each stage. As with written communication in general, also academic writing involves three essential components: the writer, the reader, and the text, as you can see here. In addition, many contextual variables need to be borne in mind, such as the requirements within the academic community. In fact, writing is a core activity within academia. I'd like to read out aloud the following quote to you. Writing is a central academic activity from the beginning stages of an academic career until the highest stages of academic tenure. Academic writing is the means by which new findings are disseminated, careers are made, professional futures are decided, reputations are formed, and titles are obtained. Academic writing is usually associated with a particular language, an academic register, but you also need to pay attention to research ethics as well as several formal guidelines throughout your research and academic writing process. So, how do you proceed? What are the phases of the academic writing process? As with the research process, also the phases of the writing process are not entirely linear. Therefore, they are typically arranged in a cyclical manner in many illustrations, as you can see here. Once again, there are arrows that go back and forth and illustrate the complexity of the writing process. Usually, the writing process starts with some kind of brainstorming or idea generation. So you collect some basic information and take notes. Next, you try to organize your ideas, for example by using mind mapping or clustering techniques. Afterwards, you should start with writing a first draft. Don't be too much concerned about mechanical aspects or small details, but just start and write. After you've finished your first draft, you should pause a brief while and come back to your paper at a later point. This break will help you to reflect on what you have written so far and on what you still need to do or could improve. Another possibility would be to ask somebody else for feedback on your paper. This is the phase of peer review. So, for example, feedback from another student, colleague, or friend. Based on the feedback that you have obtained, you'll start to revise your paper. You'll reflect on the usefulness of your peers' comments and on your own ideas that you have gained in the meantime, and try to integrate them in a second draft of your paper. However, you may also discover larger gaps or more substantial areas of improvement, and so you need to go back to a previous stage of the writing process. To exemplify, you might need to consult additional literature about your topic, you might want to find further examples or explanations, or you might even consider to restructure your overall paper. Consequently, you might need to go through a writing and feedback loop several times before you eventually arrive at your final draft. You'll then proofread this final draft for surface level mistakes, such as spelling mistakes, punctuation, or formatting before you hand in your paper. So far, we have talked about the writing process. But what about its structure? What are the requirements and characteristics of academic texts? We've already seen that the research process and the writing process are not completely linear. However, the text you write should convey the impression of linearity and a logical flow of ideas. Thus, your paper should look more or less like that. Digressions and circular arguments, as well as gaps in the argumentation, should definitely be avoided. Overall, the common thread that holds your paper together should be made visible to the reader, and then everything will be fine. To summarize, the idea of the common thread stands for the logical structure of your paper, the rigor and conclusiveness of your argument, a high degree of comprehensibility that is also accomplished through an easy flow of reading. So overall, you succeed in guiding your reader through your text. Naturally, your guiding question plays a central role here. That is why it is important to define the topic and goal of your work first, because every single aspect of your paper will align with it. But what are the different parts of the paper? In essence, it is clear that every paper has an introduction, a main part, and a conclusion. In academic writing, the main part is typically subdivided into a theoretical, an analytical, as well as a discussion part. Moreover, quite often researchers follow a problem-solution approach. So basically each academic paper consists of 5 major parts. And so you can use the 5 fingers of your hand in order to recall these 5 parts. They are introduction, theory, study or analysis, discussion, and conclusion. Now, if you want to write these different sections, what would you include or mention in them? What is their purpose? And what do you need to consider when writing this part? Briefly think about it, and then we'll continue our discussion. Again, it will be a good idea to pause the video for a few minutes to take some notes about the single sections, or at least about one of them. When reflecting about the contents of the different parts, you might have noticed that the overall structure of an academic paper resembles the shape of an hourglass. So, in the introduction, you position your research within a broader framework before you get more and more specific until the finest details of your analysis, and finally you broaden your view again and arrive at more general conclusions. But what exactly do you mention in the different parts? In the introduction, you typically first set a general frame and highlight the significance and relevance of your topic. While doing so, you should of course also state the aim or topic of your paper. If necessary, you should briefly define your key terms and introduce the structure of your paper. In the theoretical part, you provide background information about your topic and you demonstrate the motivation for your research. To accomplish this, you first of all define your key terms in a more detailed and clear manner, so to lay a common foundation for your argument. Moreover, you review and reveal what others in the area have already done. Based on the prior research, you identify your research gap and thus establish a transition to the main focus of your paper, which is captured by your research question. In the empirical part, you then describe your methodology as well as the setting, data, and participants. Be precise about your procedure, including data collection and sampling methods, as well as the reasons for selecting them and the criteria that guided your procedure. Also be clear about the analytical approach that you are using, for example, qualitative content analysis, descriptive statistics, or mixed methods research. If you opt for qualitative content analysis, for instance, you also have to specify your coding procedure, define the categories, and give examples for them. Overall, you should choose the method that best fits your research goal and your data, and you'll definitely need to consult some specialist literature at this point. After the analysis, it is critical to present your results. Think about a way of structuring the presentation of your findings, but keep in mind the essential steps of description, analysis, and interpretation. At this point, you present the results from your analysis before you move on to the interpretation in the discussion part of your paper. Interpretation means that you relate your analytical findings back to the previous literature in order to make sense of them. In how far do your results comply with those of other researchers? In how far are they different? And what are the potential reasons for this discrepancy? This will ultimately lead to a discussion of potential limitations, but also of the new gain in knowledge that your data have revealed. Reflect about potential implications, for example, theoretical and methodological implications, but also about practical applications for your school life, for instance. Afterwards, you'll summarize your study in the conclusion and give an outlook. Here you come back to your research question and answer it. Moreover, you provide suggestions for future research so to widen your perspective even further. Finally, you need to include your references of all cited literature. In the field of foreign language research, the use of APA is common. But please check whether this style complies with the requirements of your specific paper or whether a different citation style is asked for. Also, you might need to include an appendix, which can be printed or electronic in nature. Especially if your appendix is quite comprehensive, it is usually sufficient to hand in an electronic copy, for example, of all the transcripts that you have written based on your audio or video recordings. Now you've gained some basic knowledge about the research process and academic writing. To close the session, I'd like to give you some further practical advice for your writing. When conducting research and writing academic papers, you should always try to stay focused and use relevant resources. Of course, you also need to pay attention to the formal guidelines of academic writing in general and of your department in particular. Ultimately, you should always reserve enough time for proofreading, which you can do on your own or with the help of others. Checklists might assist you in this process, such as the checklist issued by the Field of Foreign Language Research and Intercultural Communication at the University of Kassel that you can see here and that you can also find on our learning platform. Before you proofread your paper, however, it is always a good idea to let time lapse away a bit. Often your paper is so familiar to you that you do not notice mistakes any longer. Your brain is even so intelligent that it fills in some gaps in your sentences even though you do not have spelled out the words. Therefore, it might be helpful to try and make the text strange to you again, for example by changing the font size and type. Ultimately, you may also ask others for feedback, for example regarding your use of language or your content. Finally, I'd like to provide you with some practical advice regarding the language of academic texts. For instance, you can find useful phrases in several languages on this page, which is structured according to the different sections of an academic text. Furthermore, a thesaurus can be helpful to vary your expression by using synonyms. I hope that this presentation has been useful to you and you may consult the literature mentioned in the references to gain more knowledge about research and academic writing. Thank you very much.